Wake to quiet up. Hello, everyone. Thanks for your patience as we navigate some technical difficulties. An online conference would be no fun if we didn't have technical difficulties. Am I right? Thank you for those of you who've decided to stick around to participate in this workshop. Although this platform doesn't enable us to do all of the good stuff of connecting we typically would do, we do hope to make this interactive and encourage you to make use of the chat box to stay connected and engaged. We are definitely the kinds of folks who typically we can see the faces of our audience, so we know when you're texting and checking email and kind of not really listening. We can't tell this time, so we just are going to trust that you're like deeply connecting to what we have to say. So wake to quiet up. Hello, Chris Archie Rensquest, Sequotten Digalmo from Seskin. I am really pleased to be here with you. I am Chris. I am one of the few people who will be sharing my voice on this workshop with you today. I will begin by telling you a little bit about the flow of our time. We'll do some introductions and invite folks as well to participate in the chat. And we're going to be talking about a few pieces of work that the Cercle on Philanthropy is engaged in to give folks a little sneak peek into the work that we're deeply committed to upholding and supporting and amplifying. We're going to be talking with you about the Philanthropic Declaration for Action as well, the Partners in Reciprocity year-long peer learning program for the settler philanthropic sector. We're also going to be sharing a couple of sneak peek slides of a tool we call the L4A, which is the Learning for Action tool. We'll have a conversation about the I4DM, which is about, well, you'll hear more about it later. We'll have a break. We promise we're going to give you a break. We're also going to provide you with an opportunity for some personal reflection. And so make sure you have pen and paper handy, or a crayon or a felt marker, whatever it is. Our preference is that you do it on old-fashioned paper, not typing. So get that handy. And then we'll make space for a Q&A. And then we're going to close out with a beautiful presentation by a fantastic artist that we're really delighted to share time and space with this afternoon. So that's a bit of the flow. I can promise you a couple of things. One is I do talk fast. Good news is this is recorded. So if I'm talking too fast for you, you can always like slow it down or come back to it and share it with your pals. The other piece is this is a bit of a discombobulating experience. Like I said, at the Cercle on Philanthropy, we have a close-knit community of organizations that we work with often, and we love to see them and to engage with folks. And so it's a little strange that I don't get to see all of you, but I trust that you're here to be in this learning space. So we're going to begin by sharing some introductions in a very particular format. We call this the Cercle way, but really it's just like how I was taught to introduce myself as a young person in my community, was to share my name and my connection to folks. And so we invite people to do their introductions in this way, to share your name, your pronouns, a sentence or two about your ancestors, and the name of the traditional territory that you're calling from. We do this for a variety of reasons, least of which is, I don't know how it is in the academic settings, but definitely in the charitable sector and in the settler philanthropic sector, folks move a little too quick to get into the conversation about what they do and who they work for. And to build relationships of connection, we wanted to slow things down and invite people to take a moment to share a little bit more about who they are. So the invitation is to use the chat box to share your name, which pronouns you use, a couple of sentences about your ancestors, but I will just add this. There are all kinds of reasons folks don't have relationship of knowing to their ancestors. Enforced slavery, genocide, Indian residential schools, the 60s scoop, foster care systems are just but a few examples of why folks don't have an understanding of who their ancestors are. So we invite you to identify chosen ancestors. Who are your chosen family? To just share a sentence or two about the good folks that help you stay grounded and connected. And last but not least, um, we invite you to take a moment and acknowledge whose territory you're on. If you know it really quick and easy because it's like in your email signature, or maybe it's on a plaque on the wall at your workplace, I invite you to take a moment, use good old Uncle Google for some answers about the area, maybe where you went to school, where you grew up, or perhaps where you attended university, and learn a little bit more about whose place you were in, and spending time in at a different point in your life. So just invite folks to do that now in the chat box. I'll give you a moment to do that. I'm going to slide over to the platform and see if I can see the chat. We'll see. It's all in French, so I'm going to make some guesses about how it is that I can see the chat, and we'll see. There we go. I see the little actioning. Can't quite figure it out. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Catherine. I see you there. Fantastic. I see a couple of folks. Great. That was just me testing to make sure that that was working and you're participating by chat, because otherwise I can't tell who's out there. So I will also model as well. So Chris Archie runs Quest. I use the pronouns she and her and welcome they and them. In Secwepemc Machine, we don't have gendered pronouns unless we're talking about the very specific relationship between two people. My ancestors come from Secwepemc, and I'm very fortunate to have an unbroken tie to my homelands, which is not something everyone is afforded. I also have a settler Canadian father, his fourth generation settler Canadian, whose family benefited from the stolen land that they then farmed and ranched for many generations in southern Saskatchewan, around two communities in particular, Ravens Crag and Maples Creek. And I'm joining you from an apartment in what is known as New Westminster, but is the Kakite First Nation community. And behind me flows the Stalo River, which is named that by the Halkamenim speaking folks, also known as the Fraser River. And the Fraser River is the western boundary marker of Secwepemc, the territory that I and my ancestors come from. So it feels a little bit like home to know that water is passing past my back. That's my introduction. I'm going to invite Alejandra to go next. I can't hear Ale, but I don't know if that's just me.
I can't hear Ali either.
There is a chance that we continue with the sound difficulties and we are not able to hear from Ale and or Heather. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if we can hear from the tech person to confirm that in fact the audience can hear Ale, even if I can't hear her. Can we have that confirmation, please? Yeah, no, I think there's something up with the platform that now Ali's sound is also not coming through. Well, this is a little heartbreaking. Um, in the meantime, I'm going to continue on and trust that you all are doing introductions in the chat. And I have two lovely colleagues, Ale, Handra, and Heather, who are joining me in this presentation. And hopefully we'll be able to hear from them because I do not want to talk for 2 hours. And I'm sure that you don't want to hear me talk for 2 hours either. So I'll continue carrying on here. We'll go to the slides for the declaration. Heather? Amazing. Thank you. I'm going to make my screen bigger so I can see it too. So I wanted to share, thank you. Oh, look at that. That's magical. That works. That's good. So I wanted to share a little bit of the story of the Philanthropic Declaration for Action. And if I could see you all, I'd be asking you to raise your hands to hear or to see how many of you have heard of this. The Philanthropic Declaration for Action was created, was a joint effort of writing and creation with folks in the settler philanthropic sector in 2015. It was in response to the TRC calls to action and a recognition that the philanthropic sector had not been named explicitly as an actor in advancing truth and reconciliation in this country. So um, an audience of folks got together and said, we need to acknowledge that there's a role here that we can play. And in doing so, they crafted a pledge, a declaration, and invited organizations from the settler philanthropic sector to sign this pledge that said they would take action. This is a really important moment in the history of the Circle on Philanthropy because it effectively created an opportunity for our organization to be in a relationship of accountability to the philanthropic sector. Although they probably had all kinds of desires about how they might set their own measures and metrics for measuring whether they were doing right in terms of reconciliation, we worked very hard to reorient the relationship of accountability to be in fact led by Indigenous peoples, that in fact Indigenous peoples get to decide if settler philanthropy is upholding this pledge. There's a couple of other images on this document I just want to highlight. One is the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's the image of a little booklet I keep here beside my desk. And it's an important and a foundational document for folks to understand. So if you're doing any research with Indigenous communities and you don't know what this document is or what it means, then you need to start there. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action were built on the foundation of the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So the 94 calls to action are built on this foundation, and the 94 calls to action, interestingly, have two very distinct sections to it that lots of people don't know about. The first 40 or so calls to action are under this umbrella called addressing the legacy. And what they're talking about there is addressing the colonial legacy and the harm of Indian residential schools. If you have never seen the calls to action, really advise that you pay attention to them, but also notice they're numbered. Every one of the 94 calls to action has a number. And I don't think those numbers are just kind of willy-nilly or accidental. These are numbered for a reason because they're based on where the priorities are for healing in communities. So the first section is called Addressing the Legacy. The second section is about the movement toward reconciliation. What we know, or at least what I know as an Indigenous woman in this country, is that settlers in this country moved really quickly to the desired outcome of reconciliation and didn't actually spend enough time understanding the legacy of harm, not only that was perpetuated by Indian residential schools, but that continues to be enacted upon Indigenous peoples' bodies and lands today. So I share that with you because it is an orientation of our organization to be thinking about how we are supporting the upholding of Indigenous rights in the work that they're doing. Great. Thank you. I just got a big, huge slide that said Ali is back with audio. And let me finish on the slide and then we'll turn to intros. The reason why this is important is because our job at the end of the day at the Circle on Philanthropy is to see increased redistribution of wealth from settler philanthropic sources to Indigenous organizations, communities, grassroots movements, and nations. And our belief is that Indigenous peoples doing the good work that their community desires to make their lives better should be abundantly funded, whether they're a qualified donee or a registered charity or not. This is in fact because we believe that Indigenous peoples have a right to assert their legal orders. And so that relationship to understanding the UN Declaration on the Rights for Indigenous People is deeply embedded in how we structure and organize our work, even if it's not obvious or really explicit in lots of the pieces that we do. I just wanted, given this particular audience as a research audience, make sure that you're aware of these pieces. So the Declaration for Action led us as an organization starting in 2018 to begin asking foundations to share with us the practices and policies that they were enacting to create change in their institutions. We invited them to think about how they were investing in the people that not only work for them, but the people that they're grant making too, and then invited them to be in a consistent practice of reflection. And over years, and through many conversations, we developed the Partners in Reciprocity, which is a year-long learning program, which is meant to provide folks with both individual, team-based, and organizational skill sets and capacities for thinking and doing differently in relationship to Indigenous peoples. Again, with the end goal that at the end of the day, more wealth from settler philanthropic institutions end up in the hands and the decision-making power of Indigenous communities. So what you see here on this slide are a few of the images that helped us get to where we're at today with the second cohort of the Partners in Reciprocity, currently about a third of the way through their time with us now. So before I go to the next piece, test, Ali, if we can hear you, I'd really love for you to do your introduction, and as well would love to make sure that Heather is queued up for her introduction too.
Thank you, Chris. Can you hear me?
I can.
So exciting. This is like, it feels like magic. Thank you, everyone. Thank you and welcome. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas. My name is Alejandra Lopez Bravo, and I am joining today from the territorios nunca antes cedidos, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I am originally from Mexico City, from the indigenous territories of the Nahuas, Matlatzincas, and Otomies. I moved to these lands in Coast Salish territories 15 years ago, and it was my choice to move here. And it's important for me to share that because there's many different journeys of migration and displacement, but it was my choice. And I continue to benefit from my colonial ancestry from Spain in my homelands and in these lands. I am mestizo. Both my parents were born and raised in Mexico City, but I do have, from my father and my great grandma, indigenous ancestry from the southeast of Mexico in Chiapas, but I have no connection to that ancestry and territory or culture as I grew up in Mexico City. So I continue to reflect on what's my responsibility to these lands and my homelands, and how can I continue to unlearn and learn how to walk in right relations. And I joined the circle about 2 months ago, and I'm excited to be here and contributing to shared learnings and knowledge mobilization. So thank you.
And I think because Heather's sharing the slides, it might just take a moment for those slides to come down so we can hear Heather's introduction.
Hello. Let me know if you can hear me.
Yay,
Yeah,
we can hear
perfect.
you.
Awesome. Right on. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're zooming in from or umanizing in from. My name, Tanse Ambawashte. My name is Heather Owach. I am, my pronouns are she and her. I am Cree and Nakota from southern Saskatchewan here in Treaty Fort Territory. On my mom's side, I'm Cree or Neheo, and on my father's side, I'm Nakota. I live and have always lived in the ancestral lands of my ancestors who've lived here in time immemorial here in southern Saskatchewan. My lineage comes from all over southern Saskatchewan here in Treaty Fort Territory and as well across the border in the states of Montana. I too have over the years have thought about how grateful I am to be able to say that I live in the same space and in the same territory and have faced the same winters and the same hot summers of Saskatchewan, of Treaty 4 territory. And I really appreciate over the years as I get older the change of seasons here. I live, work, and play in the same area as my community. I'm currently situated from my house in Regina, Saskatchewan, but my home communities are about an hour away. So as often as I can, and as much as I can, I try to go out there and visit with my relatives. I am also a part of the Cercle as the research coordinator, and I've had the great opportunity to be with the Cercle for over the last year. I'm going to say 14, 15 months now, and it's been an amazing opportunity. I also am a student. I'm currently taking my master's in public policy at the University of Saskatchewan's Graduate School of Public Policy, and so I'm hoping to continue my studies as well, and very grateful to be here and to speaking with you folks today. So thank you for allowing me to introduce myself, and I look forward to chatting a little bit more in the presentation.
Amazing. The wonders of technology when it works. It's quite a magical thing, right? Thank you for that. It's so lovely to have your voices here. So I'm going to head to the next slide. What we wanted to do is share with you a few of the things that we're learning because of the partners and reciprocity work. So one of the key pieces of homework that folks do early on is they learn about white supremacy and the specific behaviors of white supremacy inside of organizations. And they're invited to identify 3 of the ways in which they recognize that they themselves are complicit in upholding these behaviors. Additionally, we invite them to think about how they might choose to pivot their behaviors to think and do differently in their relationship to Indigenous communities. So why I really love this exercise and why I wanted to share it with this research community is I think there's a lot that can be learned from understanding how folks are self-identifying the ways in which they're complicit in upholding white supremacy in the philanthropic sector. So last year, the top 3 themes were fear of open conflict, superiority of the nonprofit written word, and comprehensiveness. We must know it all before we make a choice or make a move. And I'm betting that some of this rings true for those of you in the academic space too. When we invited folks to identify the 3 ways they might pivot towards something different, and in particular identified the top 3 ways identified by white participants, they acknowledged that they would like to have all forms of communication valued and taken seriously. They wanted increased space for how compassionate curiosity about race, cultural difference, and racial bias may be at play. And they were interested in direct and constructive feedback. Just share that. Let's head to the next slide. As I indicated earlier, we work hard to decenter whiteness in our spaces. So we were actually most curious about the ways in which BIPOC participants who work in settler philanthropy experience the space. And interestingly, in the first cohort, their top 3 themes were the same. However, what I found most interesting, our faculty noted the 3 themes most identified by BIPOC participants as a pivot towards something else that they might like to spend energy on. We're focused on transformational relationships, transformational goals, and self-care and community care. So that was really telling for us as a faculty team because we were able to reorient the entire cohort's thinking and learning around what were the pivots that BIPOC participants identified as most important. If we want to create opportunities for change, then we must be willing to hear the wisdom and heed the wisdom and actually make and create space for understanding what else could be possible. And so what I noticed about that particular thing is just how incredibly generous Black, Indigenous, and racialized participants in PER are to allow us to share that information and also make it available to others. That there are more important things to focus on than comprehensiveness and or having a sense of direct feedback. It's like, could we get further? Could we envision a future beyond what is here right now? So let's talk about the second cohort. So year 2, they've just gotten started. We just shared this information with them. Lots of things were tied, which I think is broadly an indicator of just what's happening for many folks in the world. So right now, for white folks, the top ways that characteristics of white supremacy show up and they are acknowledging that they are complicit in. At the very top, overworking is an unstated norm. Priorities and timelines that perpetuate white supremacy culture. How many of you have that experience in your life or your workplaces? Anyone out there feeling like, yeah, I've got some problem with overworking? How many of you are recognizing that you often have an unrealistic timeline about work that needs to be completed, that actually devalues relationship and prioritizes urgency and an outcome that will be harmed if you haven't prioritized relationship and time? The last 3 were superiority of the nonprofit and written word. We know academia's got this problem, you know, all of the love for written word, as well as paternalism and power hoarding. I'm not an academic, but probably there's a little bit of this floating around too. The top 3 ways that folks recognize they might want to pivot was to think about power sharing, to recognize the value of transformational relationships, but really to focus on priorities and timelines set for sustainability and equity. So even from year 1 to year 2, we're noticing a change in how people are self-reflecting and acknowledging how they could think and do their work differently. And I think that this is, for us, just one of the pieces of data that we collect through homework and exercises from participants that is letting us understand and then be able to tell a narrative about the sector and about how we, as an organization that does relational and technical skill building with the sector, can accurately respond to the needs of folks where they're at. Thanks. Next slide. This is for Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks who talked about what they're noticing in their work. So they're noticing in themselves comfort with predominantly white leadership. And then the other 2 are fear of open conflict and overworking as an unstated norm. And the very top pivot identified by BIPOC participants, because the others were all like kind of tied, was also transformational relationships. So that's 2 years of very clear indications about where the settler philanthropic sector has some interest and some opportunity to pivot towards different ways of working. Thank you. Next slide. There we go. So before I hand it off, I just wanted to say that one of the biggest things that we're learning about participants is that their organizations are willing to invest a lot of staff time in thinking about and learning how to shift practice and policy. This is an investment in the people that work inside of settler philanthropy. And ultimately, this opportunity for their learning together being led by an Indigenous-led organization and slowing down is having a ripple effect in the sector that I don't know that we'll ever be able to quantify. But I can tell you that for sure, our faculty and our team is incredibly proud of how over so many years we've engaged with the voices of Indigenous organizations who said very clearly how they want to partner with with settler philanthropic organizations, and we are making a move in the direction of creating spaces for partnership and connection where Indigenous organizations over time hopefully will feel less harm at the hands of settler philanthropic relationships. And so we're very appreciative to the organizations who have invested in their teams and invited folks to take the time to be really learning differently and taking a unique approach to that learning. So one of the key outcomes of Partners in Reciprocity is that they work on this thing called the Learning for Action tool. And it is our intention that we will be requiring all of our members to, within the first few years of being a member of the Circle, that their team must move through Partners in Reciprocity. And that once they do, they are then therefore each year after required to submit their analysis and data from the Learning for Action tool, so that over time we have access to the information that helps not only us, but helps them and helps accelerate change in the sector because of the information they're collecting. So I'm going to hand over to Heather, who will carry on and share more about the Learning for Action tool. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Because I am sharing the screen, you may not be able to see my face, but I definitely am going to carry you through the next couple of slides here. So thank you, Chris, for introducing that. So like Chris mentioned, the Partners in Reciprocity program has this component called the Learning for Action tool. And the Learning for Action tool is comprised of 3 separate elements that come out of our Declaration of Action, or comes out of the Declaration of Action. One of them being is the Learn and Remember, the Understand and Acknowledge, and Participate and Act. So over the next couple of slides, I'll go through 2 different ones, which I find we'll share a little bit more about the L4A. So the first one here is you have a slide of an evaluation key. So part of our Learning for Action tool was we created a visual evaluation key with some different icons to help folks get through. Typically, as you know, evaluation keys are either 1 to 4 or yes, no, maybe, or other. We decided to do things a little bit differently. Here at the Circle, we love and appreciate the idea of visualizing and really bringing in the elements of different aspects of our work, including seasons. So for this here, we have a cloud. On the left-hand side, you'll see a cloud, and that is basically where folks will check off or will indicate if they are the intention to do the work, or the intention is visible, or maybe they're, the brainstorming has started. And that's where you would indicate with a cloud. On the right-hand side, you'll see a couple of raindrops, and that means that the work is beginning. They're starting to make an impact, and it's just getting started, or at least, the rain is coming. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a stream, a little stream with a willow, and that means that there's a pathway. You're demonstrating impact. The work has already started. You're getting things going. It's going. It's going. And then on the right hand side, you'll see the ocean, and that means the work is fully integrated. It's a part of the system. It's been a part. It's a major component to the way in which the organization or those within the per cohort work, both individually or as an organization. I'm just going to click across to the next slide here. Just give me a few seconds. There we are. Perfect. Okay, and then the next one here. So again, the Learning for Action tool, like I mentioned, is a result of seeking accountability of partners that want to work in reciprocity. The Learning for Action tool started off being based on the Philanthropic Community's Declaration of Action, and continues to follow the 3 frameworks. It also is a tool of learning. So people who want to see where they're at, and they can find but want to support other people to develop their personal and or organizational leadership. So it's very much an opportunity for folks and organizations to see where they are. And like Chris mentioned, there is an opportunity for, on a yearly basis, to resubmit this data. And I think that that's really the amazing part of organizations, is there's so much opportunity and so much visual of growth or maybe not so much growth when it comes to data and sharing and creating stories and looking at data and particularly looking at this evaluation tool. And so this section here is the learn and remember section. And so I'm showing you 3 different questions here. And one of the questions that we ask within our Learning for Action tool is, have all staff read the declaration? So if you're a staff or you're an individual, you're going to indicate where from the cloud to the raindrop to the stream or to the ocean where in which you are situated. The next question is, have all board members read the declaration? And by that meaning the Declaration of Action. So again, you'll indicate on this lovely 4 different icons there. And the last question we're asking is, have all staff read the TRC calls to action? And so once again, you would indicate where on the stream that you are, where you're sitting at. And so that's the learn and remember section. Let me just give me another opportunity. Perfect. It's hard to see 2 screens here on my end. You wouldn't be able to see it, but I definitely have this 2-screen moment going here. So the next section is the participate and act section. And this is a little bit different than, as you mentioned, the last slide. There's sort of this 4 different icons which you can check off. This one's a little bit different. It's asking for a little bit more hard, detailed data. And part of it is, so for the first question we have percentage that is given annually relative to your asset base, and it asks for a specific percentage there, and we are asking folks to put that down. So within our last cohort of last year, from what I remember looking at the data, is some folks may put down a percentage number and some may not know. And I think even if an individual doesn't know the percentage, that's still an answer to the evaluation, and for one to realize, do I know the percentage? And or if I do, like, am I willing to put it down? And if I have the information, then I can add it down. And I think the other question that it needs to be asked when folks are going through this reflection of answering these sort of more defining questions is, if they don't have the answer, well, why not? Maybe that's an opportunity for that organization or the individual to do some investigation or to ask and to question, where can this information be given? Or restart to be gathered. The second question is information to distinguish between grants that were given to Indigenous-led and informed organizations and between First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and urban Indigenous communities. So again, we're asking folks to add that there. There is an evaluation key, like I mentioned, from the 4 different icons that you're allowed to also add there. The third question is the amount of money given since 2015 towards Indigenous and other equity-seeking communities. That would include whether it was a one-off or an ongoing commitment, and if so, what is the size of the grant, especially relative to the size of other grants given by your organization. There's a clear number amount to be indicated or inserted in there, and this is a really important question. So for example, for reality, the amount of money given since 2015 means, in terms of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report that came out in 2015, we know that as a community and as Canadian society, that this has been something that folks are looking to work towards in terms of actioning, or at least starting or thinking about the concept of reconciliation. So that's sort of where we're asking the last 7 years of that, if that has happened. And then also, again, one-off or ongoing commitment. I think that's really important to distinguish whether or not your organization is doing a one-off commitment, whether it was back in 2016 or 2015 in the start of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, or if it's an ongoing commitment, and if every year your organization or as an individual have continued to provide funds or commitments of grants towards an Indigenous-led organization or another equity-seeking community. And so these are the 3 different questions that we're asking. And like I had mentioned, the purpose of the tool is really to provide a frame to help guide your learning and actions while also sharing knowledge back within the sector. And it's really an opportunity for those within the PER program to really get a jump start on, if they're not already gathering that data, then here is an example of where you should be adding the data, but also furthermore, where you can get started within your own organization. I'm going to add the last, perfect. I'm just going to hand it off to Alejandra, who will be talking a little bit more about the definitional matrix. Thank you.
Actually, before the handoff, could you just go back one slide, Heather? Thanks. Just want to add a
I
couple
absolutely
more
can.
things. Thank you. So, we've just given you a couple of screenshots. The Learning for Action tool is a much longer document, and there's a reason we don't share it publicly. And the reason is that we want to have the control over the ways in which folks in the settler philanthropic sector are learning skill sets, tools, and capacities in order to actually have the wise, courageous, and strategic conversations inside of their philanthropic institutions to actually gather this data. The last thing that we're interested in doing is making a tool like this publicly, broadly available without those skill sets and capacities. Is that if you have someone who's like super keen to just like bring this inside their organization and go and, knock on doors and ask these questions and get the data, is that if you're doing that alone, that's going to come at a high cost to the individual. If you're doing that without the engagement and the strategic thinking of leadership and the analysis of power throughout an organization to actually disrupt policy and practice, that is also going to be a very tiring piece of work. And so this tool, though we don't share broadly, is also helped. It will also help us over time build a more of a case for why the T3010 should actually be collecting this kind of data. As many of you know, the T3010 is kind of the annual filing expectation for charitable organizations. And one of the big things that they don't differentiate is that anyone could indicate that they serve Indigenous populations. However, as Ale will be sharing with you, we'd like more and more organizations to learn about the I4DM and understand why is it important to distinguish between an Indigenous-led organization versus an organization with Indigenous beneficiaries. In large part, what we know is that since 2014 and up until most recently, the T3010 data has indicated that less than 1% of funding goes to Indigenous organizations. However, we know the true number is actually much smaller because the T3010 data doesn't differentiate between an Indigenous-led and an Indigenous benefiting organization. So this becomes something that not only is a tool for helping the philanthropic organizations who are in the program learn and make sense together about this, it also gives us at the Circle information and wisdom to advocate for policy change systemically. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Heather, and over to you, Ale.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Chris. Can you hear me? Can you just confirm that you can hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, and please, Heather and Chris, feel free to add and build on what I'm sharing, as I know you were the creators of this matrix alongside the rest of the Circle team. So your additions and insights are welcome. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit of what Chris talked about, the I4DM tool. And I'm going to give a little bit of history. But first, I want to share that this tool was a result of wanting accountability of where the dollars from settler philanthropy were going, and also an invitation for researchers, funders, donors, and nonprofit organizations to use this as a tool to support Indigenous-led work. So I want to give a little bit of history because I think it's very important to share the journey of where these tools come from, because it's lots of different hearts and relationships and trust and pain and collaboration and co-creation that happened over the years to get to where we're at now. So from 2009 to 2014, the Circle, alongside others, created a report called Measuring the Circle 1.0 to capture some information about the relationship between the philanthropic sector and Indigenous peoples. And because this data was just captured from CRA, it was very limiting and not necessarily accurate about whether these funds, as Chris said, went to Indigenous organizations and to specifically First Nations, Métis, on Inuit-led work. And so in 2016, the Cercle, alongside the Winnipeg Foundation, United Way, and AJA, it published a report called Measuring the Cercle 2.0, again, to just share some of the trends between the philanthropic sector and First Nations, Inuit, Métis in Canada, but focusing in Manitoba. And during this time, there was a little bit more in-depth guidance about how this matrix should be a tool for funders to better understand what Indigenous-led organizations and Indigenous work is, and not just Indigenous benefiting charities or Indigenous informed, and where those funds were. So in 2018, which is very exciting to share because we're getting closer to what we're presenting to you now, the Cercle has been asking, Indigenous-led organizations and Indigenous nations and communities, how can this tool also add value to their organizations, to their work, and to their nations? And how can this framework can also change practices within the settler philanthropic organization, not only about how they do granting and how they allocate their granting, but also how they partner and they build relationships with Indigenous-led organizations. And so one of the exciting things that was incorporated in this most recent I4 definitional matrix that was shared at the end of 2021 is the concept of reciprocity. And so you can see on the matrix, there are 4 columns: Indigenous benefiting, Indigenous informed, and Indigenous partnerships, to be able to reflect the idea that it's not just about the resources, it's about the relationships, and how you identify what organizations are Indigenous-led, or you move towards funding Indigenous-led work. It's also about being in right relations and partnership with Indigenous nations and Indigenous organizations. And there's on the left, there's some categories that can help the philanthropic sector also identify within their organizations how they value, acknowledge the wisdom of Indigenous peoples in the leadership of their organizations, in their practices, in their teams, if there's accountability to these communities. And so we constantly also share that this matrix is not meant to be like a policing mechanism. We really want settler philanthropic organizations to use it to have difficult and courageous conversations within their organizations about where they are in the spectrum. And for Indigenous organizations also to be able to have conversations about where they are in the spectrum, but also to use it as a tool to advocate for more funding for their work. And, part of the Cercle works alongside Indigenous-led organizations, Indigenous-informed organizations, organizations with Indigenous beneficiaries, our members, and philanthropic signatories of the Declaration of Action, to encourage people and organizations to learn, acknowledge, and understand more about reconciliation and the decolonization of wealth, and how to steward resources in a more ethical way, and how to, at the end, give resources and fund Indigenous-led work. So this tool is both for settler philanthropy and Indigenous organizations to observe and reflect on the power dynamics in their organizations and be able to move along this matrix towards allocating funding and resources and build better relations that support the self-determination of Indigenous communities. And so we also wanna offer, this matrix has some questions in the next slide that incorporate the practice of reciprocity. And we wanted to give these guiding questions for organizations to be able to see themselves reflected, to see how these conversations add value to their work, to identify where, in this matrix they are, and also what can these bring to your funding mechanisms to your grant making processes? How are you doing partnerships, if you have any partnerships or relationships with Indigenous-led organizations? And for Indigenous organizations also to be able to advocate for their work by using this tool to say, you know, we are an Indigenous-led organization, and your funding goes mostly to organizations that are not Indigenous-led, but that are benefiting our communities. But we would like you to acknowledge that there's leadership in our communities that know how to do this work in a better and in a good way. And so, yeah, this, you can access this I4DM in the Circle's website. I think it's also being shared at the kiosk space of the Circle. But if we're able, we're going to put it in the chat, the link to our website. This is a tool that we want everyone to take to have conversations within your organizations and be able to identify, hopefully, where you are in the spectrum. And we invite everyone. You don't need to be a philanthropic organization but to use this tool to identify your relationships, your partnerships, and whether or not you're supporting Indigenous-led work. So with that, I'm the bearer of good news. We're gonna go for a 10-minute break, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. I'm not gonna say at what time because I think we're all in different time zones, but in 10 minutes from now, we'll see you at 12:37. That would be my time, 12:37. So that time where you're in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, folks. I hope that you were able to have a little bit of a break, whether you moved your body or you refilled your coffee or tea, listened to some music, hopefully you weren't like diving back into your emails. Though I welcome if you're on Twitter and you're tweeting about this, it's fantastic. But hope you just had a little bit of a rejuvenation in that moment, regardless of what time of day it is, wherever you are. So we have been sharing a lot of information with you, and I wanted to take a moment and invite folks to do some reflection. So at the Circle, we have a deep commitment to learning and to our learning through reflecting about our experience and then to share and do sense making together. We use a framework called Head, Heart, Hands, and that is predominantly a tool that we invite people into to bring some awareness to the chatter of our brain. You know, the world that we're in prioritizes and dominates with the knowledge in our brain, but actually invites you to sink into and settle into an awareness and understanding of the wisdom of our body and what that has to offer as well. And we invite people to do these kinds of reflections so that if they decide to move toward action or to stop or pause action, they're doing it from a place of a little bit more grounded, centered space. So we created a little head, heart, hand for each of you. And because you're researchers in the crowd, I am believing that you care about questions and you like to be engaged in questions and feed your curiosity. So these are the questions. What have you learned and what are you curious about? This is an opportunity for you to jot down what you've learned or what you're curious about as it relates to the presentation that we've shared so far. So we want you to jot that down. Not only is it helpful for your continued learning to write it down while it's still fresh, it's also helpful for us because when we invite you to share your questions in the Q&A, you'll have already done some thinking about it. So we'll get actual questions, not just random comments. So please add that. In the heart space, we've asked you if during our presentation, you've had any of your values activated. Did you have a moment of like, yes, this really matters because I care about community-led research, or I feel very activated because this is a conversation that supports equity. And so we're just inviting you to reflect on which values were activated. And then if you can just take a moment to consider how you felt that activation and where in your body did you feel that activation. So jot down some notes there about that. For those of you who have a strong relationship to your brain, um, it can feel a little funny to think about how you might be feeling or experiencing values in your body. But we invite you to track down, like, did you feel something in your stomach? Did your heart flutter? Did you get excited? Did you sit up? Did you feel activated in your arms or in your hands? We invite people to reflect on the wisdom of their body and the ways in which they feel activated, because lots of the work that we do when we invite people into is not easy work. It's the kind of work that can be fraught with, personal reflection, but also recognition for the ways in which we are complicit in harm to others. So this connecting to body is a really essential practice for noticing when we might be feeling activated in a way that's unhelpful to relationship building or connecting with others. And this last question is, what is an action that you can start, stop, or pause in your work based on these learnings? So perhaps you're embarking on a big piece of work with an Indigenous partner, and you're like ready to go, go, go. Perhaps seeing the I4DM is going to support you to pause, to take a bit more time to learn, to ask yourself the questions, and to share the I4DM with potential partners so that you can hear from them about how they might want to be in a partnership or a relationship to the work that you're doing. So this world is predisposed to action, to moving, to going, quick, quick, quick. And so the permission you're invited to consider for yourself here is how you might actually pause or stop. Sometimes there's things that we do that actually just need to stop being done. So feel free to capture that here for the reflection. I'll also just remind folks that, of course, these slides will be shared, so you're welcome to print them out, to post them around your home or your desk space. And definitely this head, heart, hands could be something that's helpful in any of the work that you're doing when you're learning something new or trying to think about how to integrate what it is that you're hearing and learning into the work that you're doing. Great. Ali, are you seeing any folks? So the invitations to do this reflection, and if you'd like, you're welcome to share your reflections in the chat, and Ali can bring it to us for further comment, or perhaps folks are busy writing. Have you seen any questions in the chat, Ali?
So no, I haven't. I haven't been able to see the chat because when I tried, it froze this screen when I signed in.
Maybe our amazing our platform guy can tell us if he's seeing questions or reflections in the chat. Don't be shy. Let's hear your voice. Are you seeing folks add their reflections or questions in the chat? Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I mean, it's perfect timing that you're willing to do that, because this little bit of time here, about 5 minutes, is for questions. And so if you have burning questions, about what we've shared with you today, we would welcome them. We'd be delighted to answer some questions. A couple of things about questions. Questions are usually between like 8 and 12 words long. Questions are not comments, and questions should have a natural question mark at the end of them. Another thing to just share is if you have a specific individual conundrum that you're grappling with and you want like an Indigenous perspective on it, that's not the question we're interested in answering for you. So again, if you have a question about the content we've shared, we'd really love to hear that and respond. And we're going to hang out here for like a juicy 5 minutes so that folks can formulate questions. You can hang out in your reflection, but please don't leave because we have a really delightful and super awesome presentation by a fantastic artist. So you don't want to miss that. No questions. Are people asleep? Are you guys actually listening out there? Are there folks there? And Jean-Marc and Anik have confirmed there are no questions. This is a very unresearchy kind of crowd, I suppose. And that's fine. It means that likely we'll end early, which is delightful because the gift of time is always a gift. And so I'm going to invite Ali to continue on. Christian.
Thank you, Chris. And I am delighted to transition us to our next guest. I'm going to let her introduce herself more thoroughly the Cercle way. But I do want to share that Melanie Schambach, is someone that I've been in community for like more than 10 years in my journey of these lands. We are fellow Latinas, and is someone that I really, really continue to learn about how to be in good relationships with the people that she supports, amplifies their voices, gives platform to, collaborates with, co-creates. And I always have her voice in my head that we are all gifted, that we can all create beauty. She has pushed me to paint, which I never do. And so in addition to like building very, very, very practical, like creative artistic skills, she has taught me how to have fun with those and be having fun with other people to create better understanding and belonging with each other. So welcome, Melanie.
Thank you, Ale, for that really sweet intro. And especially thank you for everyone at the Cercle who are seeing the value of this practice and some of the teachings of this practice. I am right now calling from Mayan territories, what we understand today as the city of Guatemala, where the languages of Cachiquel and Spanish are spoken. And my name is Melanie. My 4 last names are Schambach Morel Garces de Pocas. That's in German, French, Spanish, and English. So that gives you a quick overview of the colonial legacy that is in my lineage. I have a grandfather who had a farm of sugar here in Guatemala, another grandfather who was in the US Navy, a grandmother who came from a family of ambassadors and consulates of French Canada in Guatemala, and my other grandmother who did a lot of community service in faith-based organizations. So I grew up without the awareness on the impact that my ancestry had, and at the same time how I was benefiting from it until later age. As a child, I grew up in Dapa, which is a fog forest in Colombia. I grew up in a tin roof house, so you could hear the storm of the water really loud. And outside, you would see a really mossy trees and toucans and yaruma trees, or these trees that have like these giant leaves. And I spent a lot of time alone in the mountain, which I consider it being a very rich in nature. And I moved to Guatemala City as a teenager, where you could see the epitome of the rich and the poor with very little middle class. And that started kind of like opening my eyes to many injustices that happen around me, and as well as like how I was directly benefiting from it. So as I started rebelling against social norms that were being imposed and asking a lot of questions, I became the devil to my parents' eyes, literally, and I had to move to Coast Salish territories, asking questions and looking for answers really to these deeper questions. And I, just scratching the surface to these questions, I quickly understood that those slavery attitudes and colonial legacy was still as alive in what we call Canada as it was alive in Guatemala. And so that brought people together in dialogue and brought people to connect deeply with each other and with one and who really wanted to be at the edge of creating change and transformation. And I found art and creativity as an incredible medium to be able to like tap into our inside world and being able to like see it outside. I understand that. To witness stories from others and grow into our own empathy, to share as a community when we're creating together and what happens when we share in community. And understanding that this idea of being an artist, even though I went to art school at Emily Carr, I had to unlearn a lot of stuff that I learned in this big institution, because I understand art as a right of a human being, of being able to express ourselves. And even just being an artist with capital A is a colonial mindset that we've professionalized the arts and only a few people can create art. So dismantling all that, I've been developing this participatory painting process where different groups of people come together to share stories and connect with each other to bring meaning into public spaces. So let me show you some slides. And I'm not very used to, so I'm giving you the disclaimer that I'm not used to just presenting, because everything that I do is incredibly interactive. But we thought that there's some, with the context of this conference, we thought that some of the journey that I've been on as a facilitator and art producer, it would give you some insight about the work that you're doing. So I really hope that after this, you feel like sparked in just like some of the questions that Chris just said, to really look at your actions and your decision-making power on how you can make your change internally to the relationships that you have at work, at community, to the systems that you have impact on, and the way how we create culture around us. I hope technology is on my side today. So if you don't see the slide, I'm assuming that I'll hear from you. Right now, what you see here is the St. Mark's Cathedral in what we call today Seattle. And on the left, you see the Jewel James master carver from Lummi Nation hugging a priest from the church. And then beside it is Chief Phil Lane Jr., Salish spiritual leader, giving a speech to members of the church. And so then on the right, you see, the church with a painting on the back, which I will address to this painting later on. And so you can see how this, I never thought in my lifetime I was being able to see these powerful images of having nuns being smudged by indigenous women and seeing a bunch of white church people listening attentively to Uncle Phil talking about the importance of protecting Mother Earth on the times that we're living. So when Chris was talking earlier about transformational relationships, I came back to this moment and I thought about this and how I try to center radical collaborations in the work. And so in that process, I really focus, like the intention is on the depth of engagement of the participants. And in the production, the final outcome, which is either a painting or a poster or a video of the painting, we really focus just on the impact that that can cause on a wider audience. So it's a very different hat. Right here you see a painting called Art in Hard Times. This is a mural that was done digitally as people were working with different art mediums in their homes. This was for 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. And it was 50 people reflecting on the realities that the pandemic was surfacing. So I'll give you a second to look at what's in there. We worked with 5 different artists who did subgroups working on different mediums. And I'm going to, so there's one little part that you see on the bottom right corner of this painting, and you're gonna see this piece. And this piece was created by an artist. Her name is Jess Curran, from Guelph. And her piece in reflection to the pandemic was this: a cycle of systemic racism, supported by white privilege and bias, slowly burn a community, destroying not only our society, but also the environment. So what I'm gonna ask of you, because I'm gonna show you a few quotes, I'm gonna ask you that as I read them out loud, could you please also read them out loud in your own home as I show the quotes. The painting I wanna show you, so I'm gonna show you a few quotes, then I'm gonna give you a couple of stories, and then I'll show you some more quotes after that. This is a painting called One Body. It was acrylic on canvas, and this was done in 2017. And there was about 40 humans who became homeless. They engaged in this participatory process to give feedback to a faith-based organization. And they gave feedback on how to improve social services and how to directly give a contribution to the strategic plan that the organization was doing. So instead of surveys, we did this participatory painting. And this is one quote from one of the participants. There was 40 quotes. I chose this one for today. This, for obvious reasons, this person asked to be anonymous in London, Ontario. And they said, a lot of people can't handle the truth. I give the truth. It was Catholic priests who did this to our people. How can we trust them? So you can imagine when we brought these quotes to the board members of this faith-based organization, they get to connect emotionally with the images so that they can inform the strategic plan from a place of heart. Hopefully, that was the aim. This is a painting which I will talk a little bit further later in this presentation. It's called Granddaughters. It was acrylics on wood in 2013. Where 3 elders and 3 granddaughters from Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam nations came along with another 80 community members. I think I might have that number wrong. It might be 60 or 80 community members. And they spoke and reflected about community engagement and nature in Stanley Park in Shrewsbury. So I'll just share a quote for now that was part of these interviews to make this painting alive, but later I'm going to tell you more about this particular project. So in the image you see the building of a residential school, and there is a dandelion root that is growing through it. We were looking at medicine plants and considered that, we learned that the dandelion root is an incredible medicine for cancer. And this quote was shared by Ta'a, Amy George, from Tsleil-Waututh, Coast Territories. And it was a longer recording, and so I chose this part from that longer recording. Canada wrote to Germany and asked what else they could do to get rid of us. And the Nazi didn't just answer the letter. It's called the White Paper. They came here. He came here and talked to Canada. The Nazi sent a doctor, a dentist named Schansfield, and he would pull the teeth without freezing. He was sexually abusing the little girls. He was real evil person. They stuck needles to the tongues of the kids who spoke their language. They had to leave it in their tongue. This happened in the residential schools. We were hungry all the time. All these people came out of there, and there is only a few of us left in my age group that are still alive. Suicide, overdose, alcoholic. I was so confused about who I am and what I'm supposed to be. And I just ask you to just notice whatever's coming out for you. And if it's discomfort, we'll just sit on that discomfort. And Amy George is an incredible spiritual leader and community organizer who mobilizes a lot of communities on the protection of the Burrard Inlet and Mother Earth in general. She's been an incredible guide for many of us. We'll take a deep breath, and I'll go back to that project in just a few minutes. This is painting called Brescia Centennial Portraiture. It's acrylics on wood, and it was done in 2020. And this is Brescia is a university, Canada's only university just for women, and it was put by the Ursuline Sisters. And so staff, students, faculty, board members, and local community was commemorating their 100-year anniversary while looking back at the history of the university and the present. And so as my role as a social artist, I also have to focus on giving space for the voices that are often misheard and misrepresented. And after engaging with some other people from the community, this was one of the images in the quotes. This person asked to remain anonymous as well. And you can see this image on the painting as well. And so her message was, in the context of truth and reconciliation in Canada, it is vital for universities to shine light on the hidden truths and amplify Indigenous voices of the land. I'll just give you a second to sink that in. And this is a painting that is called The Belonging Action. It's an acrylic on Crezone panels. It was done in 2012. Were about 90 people reflecting on belonging while looking back at the different stories of migration of Coast Salish land since time immemorial. So stories of migration before and after settlement. And so we invited knowledge holders to inform participants on stories that are often hidden under the carpet. And so in this painting, you would see stories of Komagata Maru, MV Sansi, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Japanese internment camps, the Hogan's Alley, what else am I seeing there? Temporary Foreign Workers Program, and between others, forced migration. I'm going to share this quote that was part of the painting. You're going to see it on the top middle side. And the quote was by Meta, who was living in Vancouver, Coast Salish at the time. And Meta says, every day I am working to take off the masks that want to blind me from seeing my role in the ongoing colonization of these lands. It is time to look in the mirror and see my white privilege and how my actions are having an impact. I'm noticing that image is a little blurry, but you can find all of these on the original website. I'll just give you a second for that to sink in. This is called E a la E. It's acrylic on canvas. It was done last year, 2021, and was one part of a much, much bigger project called the Red Road to DC. And it consisted of a totem pole journey, totem pole that was created by the House of Tear Carvers from Lami Nation. And they gifted this totem pole to Biden administration. The totem pole reflected different proclamations that were there to save some sacred sites that were being in danger from different industrial extraction companies. So this painting came along to get people to share about their understanding of their connection to nature. As we traveled through Bears Ears, Thacker Pass Mine, different dams, rivers that were being dried, Line 3, Line 5, Standing Rock. And so one of the quotes that I chose for you to look at today is from Marilyn Mayers from Bellevue, Washington State. And this is one of the images in the painting. It says, sometimes we need to go backwards to move forward. Sorry, that's supposed to be move forward. The idea that going back to our past, our family's past history, can be awkward until you see it actually propels you forward and enables you to be stronger and to see the beauty all around you. Life and beauty everywhere. So she's using a canoe as a metaphor on how you're looking backwards, you're looking at your back history to move forward. Now I want to share with you a story. This was in 2011. This was a project called Sia la Vida. It's acrylics on canvas. And in this picture, you see a 30-foot long painting that was created by people living in San Miguel Ixtahuacan. It was the Man peoples in Guatemala who are being directly impacted by Canadian mining, this particular mine called Goldcorp. And so they made this painting with the intention to educate Canadians about their contribution to the destruction of their community. There was about 60 people who participated. Right now, you're seeing an image of some young adults who, knowing that this painting was going to make it to Vancouver, where the home of Goldcorp is and 900 other companies, they drew stories about how their water, land, and air was being contaminated, about how babies and young children were getting skin diseases from the river, and how, this company was really destroying the whole social fabric of how they went from like a really solid community that learned how to work together to all of a sudden being apart and essentially killing each other, as some of the local people became workers, and then the other people, which we're talking about their cousins and best friends, they become activists against this company. At the same time, we took the painting also to other public spaces around San Miguel Ixtahuacan, where they would share this knowledge to other local people, as this company, as some of you may know, can really give misinformation to locals about the impacts of the mine. So when we brought the painting back to Vancouver Coast Salish territories, we created two other 30-foot canvases. One was created by UBC students, and the message was, we are also being lied to, as they unpacked the impact of the land. And the other painting asked NGOs, universities, charity organizations, and foundations on how they were receiving money from companies that were destroying the lives and land of people elsewhere. So this photo is taken in Vancouver Art Gallery. The fascinating thing the story I want to share with you is that during that same week, as we were getting people to reflect on corporate funding, I got a gig somewhere else with I really can't tell you exactly which gig I had, but I had a gig, and I got a check for the gig that same week once I finished my facilitation workshop. And it was definitely something around diversity and belonging. And I got the check, and the check was from United Way. And so I wondered, I'm like, oh, I wonder who funds the United Way. And then I saw on their website on how Goldcorp, along with other mining companies, are funding United Way. So I've been seeing that as I'm trying to address some of the impacts of mining in Guatemala, I'm also directly benefiting from the devastation caused to the people. And this is the people that I love as my brothers and sisters, and I'm benefiting from the devastation that is causing to them. So I want to leave us with just this question just for a minute. How does ethical funding looks like? And how is this practice building healthy relationships of reciprocity? And I had to ask that question since then thereof. Another story I wanted to tell you, which is I mentioned a bit earlier. This is a commission by Stanley Park Ecology Society. They put out a call of a mural that they wanted to accomplish for two things. One, they wanted to engage community, and two, they wanted a mural that would speak about the nature of that land. So I made a proposal to do a community engagement process and look at stories of the land, as well as the medicine plants that were inside of Stanley Park. They said yes, and so I engaged the local community. This was, I believe it was an $8,000 grant. I facilitated a process of about 4 months with the community. Then there was time that we had to invest before and that after. I hired 4 other facilitators to do this project with me, and we shared decision-making power as to how the process was going to be unfolded. And so from those 4 facilitators, 3 were granddaughters from Tsleil-Waututh Nation, Squamish Nation, and Musqueam Nation, which are the 3 local indigenous nations where Vancouver sits. And the 5 of us, and then there was somebody else who was indigenous in the Philippines. The 5 of us invited 3 elders that were spiritual leaders from Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam as well, and asked them to share stories about Shui, about Stanley Park, since before it was called Stanley Park, as this was part of like the, it was around the time that Stanley Park was celebrating their anniversary. So we invited Judy Sparrow, Emmy George, and Audrey Rivers, who I admire deeply. And we also invited Siswis to share knowledge about the medicine plants that were there. And of course, as you can imagine, there was a lot of stories that were reflected a lot of pain, because there was a lot of harm that was caused as Stanley Park was created. And so what we decided to do is to honor these stories and represent these stories in a way that a medicine plant would match the story. And so as you saw what I shared before of the residential school with the dandelion, that's an example of how we were bringing an image of a story of pain and bringing medicine to it. And this is not only visually, but when you're painting it, I really do believe that sometimes when we paint with intention, it's as a form of prayer, and we're internalizing the values of the message that we're giving. So once the mural was complete, 4 months later, unfortunately, Parks and Rec, alongside with Stanley Park Ecology Society, which was a triad partnership, they censored the mural. And I recognized that I did a lot of mistakes along the journey and realized that my privilege of accessing space, as much as I had good intentions, there was impact that was caused a lot of harm. Relationships were broken. People were re-traumatized. It was awful on how, once again, we were silencing the stories of folks who work really hard to do community, like really meaningful community work, and who the system just continues to silence. And so we reflected a lot with the facilitators, along with the knowledge holders and the elders, and we decided to embark on this years process with Stanley Park Ecology Society and SPES to try to get the murals back to their original place, which was going to be hung in Stanley Park. And of course, folks in the city and in SPES, they get paid by the hour to do that 5-year process, and we weren't. So we were totally burnt out on trying to make justice for the painting to go up. And the immediate reasons of why they decided to not put this mural public, one was, which I think this is, well, I'll leave you have your own opinions, but one, they felt that the representation of the three indigenous elders was discriminating other cultures. So let me just go back to here. You're going to see in this painting 3 portraits. So they said that the representation of these elders were discriminating other cultures. The other reason was that the term Mother Earth was too religious. So on the first panel here, you can see the words Mother Earth, and there was a huge resistance to this. Another reason was that the staff was not trained to respond to the reactions of the public when they see this mural. And then there were 2 images in particular that they felt that were offensive. One was the one that I showed earlier of the residential schools with the dandelions, which you see on the second panel. And the other one you see on the 4th panel, which is the Lions Gate Bridge with the image of the crown on top of the Lions Gate Bridge, created by one of the participants that we engaged at the park. So those 2 panels were removed. They basically cut the mural in 5 parts. And on 2020, December of 2020, so this was 7 years later, they finally put up this painting, but without those 2 panels. So they cropped the painting and decided what to put. So I want to leave you with this question. How is white supremacy damaging public art? And I want to follow that with this question. Here we see a mural going from the top left to the right. One is addressing the tar sands. The next is, it's a painting that accompanied a totem pole to stand up for sacred sites. Next to it, we're seeing a mural that addresses the importance of protecting the Burrard Inlet from the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Below it is the one on Canadian mining. And then top left is a painting that was that engaged Indigenous people in a 6-day potlatch. Next to it, there's a painting that addresses fossil fuels, as it was in Beaver Lake Cree Nation. The next to that, you see 2 paintings. One is addressing Bill C-31 that cut funds on refugees, and a mural that is addressing an illegal tank that is keeping a scarlet chucktonut, is this whale that has been in captivity for 50 years. And so the question here that I want to ask you is, why are these projects not being funded? And so in the years in this ethical framework that keeps evolving, I ask to get paid for the service and not for the painting. I consider that the paintings belong to the community, so they're not to be sold. If people want to make prints, they have to do it in the spirit of gifting it to people or any type of reproduction. And if an organization wants to sell the painting, they have to reach consensus with all the participants. And so I want us to really think about that. Why are these projects being poorly funded? And my belief is that when we are really getting to the root cause of a lot of the harm in the world, funders tend to step away. I think there's like a fear. And when we're in fear, we avoid, we get defensive, we attack, we close up, or we just run away and retreat. So one thing that I've really noticed is that when we really involve funders in painting, when we involve funders to really talk to participants and connect from a place of heart, when we hear each other's stories, when they are mixing colors together, magic is just bound to happen because relationships get built. And then folks really do find the courage to take riskier decisions in the way how they run things. I really do think that when unpacking white supremacy, even though it's not an easy journey, listening changes and taking concrete actions to that journey of awareness happens. I've seen it happening through this work many times. Just to end, I want to share with you some quotes one quote is from, I'm going to pass through I'm sorry that I'm skipping through some of these. This is a painting that's called Our Shared Responsibility, and it's a totem pole that was carved by Jewel James and gifted to Beaver Lake Cree Nation to honor the resistance of the ongoing harm from the tar sands. And as we went through different cities, we asked folks to really reflect about their connection to nature. So I want to share these two quotes. One is this medicine man that says, comes to those who seek healing and prayers. This dancer is gifted to help open the door to the spirit world and speaks to the great mystery on behalf of the ones who needed healing. This is Adrian LeChance from Plains Creek. And Diana D. George from Solitude Nation shared this quote: Creator, grandfather, grandmother, ancestors, guide us. Keep us strong for the world to hear our voices, to keep Mother Earth healthy, then we'll all be healthy. And this is a painting that was done last year that I introduced already. And I just want to share three of the quotes, and then we'll pass it back to Chris. E ala e. Each rising of the sun gives us an opportunity to make better decisions, to do what is right for our people, and to do what is right for our land. This is Anela Joy Gutierrez and she's a Hawaiian. The lines and dots are my face tattoos, which represent our reclamation of the practice and our identity. The swordfish represents the abalone inlay on our traditional plank canoe, again, our reclaiming and revival of our culture and togetherness. The paddles behind represent our navigation through this colonial world and how we very much aspire to move as a team and with the loves our cultures instills in us. Also, we use the constellations as a map when we would night paddle. So these were all responses to the questions: how do we build capacity to understand that we're all interconnected? And that was by Kelly Lopez, and that was in Chumash Nation. And I want to end with this last quote. It is a Destiny, and I met Destiny in Bear's Ears. She's Donnée Navajo. As a young girl, when I was feeling lost and alone, Shimasani, which means grandma, told me to follow her outside. Shimasani asked me to take off my shoes and place them in the red dirt. Shiyasi, my baby, you're never alone. Mother Earth is always here for you. When you plant your bare feet onto her, she can feel what you're feeling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Just give it a few moments here. Just let me know when we're switched over. I'll be doing the closing. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. Pinamaya Kinanaskamatin, I really appreciate you being able to share your work and your journey, and the stories and some of the stories that you were able to hear and come across within your journey. Very powerful. One of the quotes that you had talked about was extremely heartfelt and deep. And the questions that you asked and have began to pose yourself are questions that I'll take away today and begin to ask myself when it comes to ethical funding, and really how and why we don't see this type of art and journeys maybe not necessarily as funded as it should be. With that, I appreciate each and every one of you in the audience today. From what I'm told, there's over 50 audience members, and I appreciate you for sticking alongside of us in the last 2 hours. We had a bit of a tough jump start, but hey, what's the virtual world not without any sort of challenge. I appreciate you for being a part of our session today, and I hope that you stick around for the closing session tomorrow. And any questions that you have in regards to this presentation today, I definitely encourage you to reach out to us. We can't see the chat questions, but definitely we will get a hold of some of the questions you have, or you can email us and get in touch with us at the Cercle. Our website, we encourage you to take a look at, thecercle.ca, where you can also find the Declaration of Action, as well as the I4DM resource under the resource pages. You are also welcome to join our newsletter and keep up to date with some of the activities, events, and some of the other offerings that we at the Cercle hold. With that, I appreciate the opportunity today that we have as the PhiLabs Indigenous Hub to participate and share some of our learnings and our teachings and our offerings alongside Chris Archie, our CEO, Alejandra Lopez Bravo, our manager of shared learning, and as well as Melanie Shambosh, our artist, who was able to share with us their journey. With that being said, I think we're right on time, and I will end off with thanking you in my language, Pinamaya Kinanaskamatin. Hi.